Hello, everybody. Eric Apricot here. It's been fascinating to watch Coach Steve Kerr adapt his offensive system to Jimmy Butler, despite their elemental differences. In short, Kerr is a waterbender and Butler is an earthbender. Steve Kerr's inspirations are Phil Jackson's triangle offense and Greg Popovich's Spurs motion offense. He played in both these systems, and they're based on flow, off-ball movement, and passing, waterbending. Jimmy Butler is an earthbender who wants to be on ball and run over you. So head tap is one of the first plays that Steve Kerr asked Jimmy Butler to run, and it used to look like this. The top part involves the ball swinging to the opposite side, but the interesting part is the small goes into the lane and sets this cross screen for Kevin Durant. Steph gets solid contact on LeBron, which puts him behind KD for the entry pass. Sweet turnaround. Here's another example. The ball's going to swing across the top. Steph will come in and set this cross screen for KD. Entry pass to KD. And note that Zaza Pachulia here, the big, is going to end up coming down and sitting in the dunker spot. That's so if KD drives, then it's hard for this man to rotate. After KD left, the Warriors kept the play around, and they ran it for Andrew Wiggins. Ball swings across the top. Brad Wanamaker sets the cross screen for Wiggins. The names change, but the elements stay the same. Back to the basket post up, and the big guy drifts to the dunker spot. Here's another one, GP2, the cross screen. Wiggins posts up, back to the basket. The big drifts down and ends up in the dunker spot. So let's rewind to Jimmy Butler's first game. He pretty much gets off the plane and they teach him 2 or 3 plays. This is the first time they run head tap with Butler. Pajemski with the cross screen. There's the entry pass. And Kevon Looney runs to the dunker spot. But Butler runs it very weirdly. Instead of taking the entry pass close to the basket for a post-up, he intentionally receives the pass way out on the perimeter where he can face up. Pajemski thinks Butler just ran the play wrong, so he immediately points and says, "Don't worry, Jimmy, we know you're fresh off the plane and you still got airplane peanuts in your pockets, but just pass it to Moody and then we'll turn this into some other play." But Butler isn't confused. He wanted the ball out here and he wanted to face up. He knows he can get past his man, but he's reading what happens afterwards. If this man helps, you've got, of all people, Kevon Looney in the corner. That's by design, because the way the ancients ran head tap, the big always drifted into the dunker spot. But Jimmy Butler doesn't want a big in the dunker spot. He wants someone who can hit a corner 3. And even if this other defender rotates, you've got Guy Santos, who is not your first option for a 3. Jimmy says, all right, I've calculated all 14,000,007 possibilities, and this is not a good place. And so when Pajemski tells him to bail out to Moody, he actually accepts the bailout. Now time has passed. The Warriors have had 2 or 3 practices with Jimmy, and they've adjusted the play. The ball is going to swing across the top. Pajemski sets the cross screen for Butler. Jimmy receives it on the perimeter like he likes it. Now look at the 2 adjustments. First of all, Draymond does not drift into the dunker spot. He just stays out here in the perimeter. And secondly, the Warriors put Quinton Post in the corner. Now Jimmy likes what he sees. He knows he's going to beat his man. This defender's going to have to rotate, and there's going to be an open corner 3. JV also sees this unfolding, and as he rotates, you can see him signal with his hands and his mouth probably to DeRozan that he has to cover the corner man that he's leaving. But DeRozan decides to challenge the drive instead. Jimmy Butler makes a pretty difficult pass look easy, and Quinton Post drains the 3. Here's another example. Ball enters to the side. The ball's going to swing across the top. Steph goes into the paint to set a screen for Jimmy Butler. Steph adds a little extra gluteus maximus for improved screen effectiveness. Jimmy cuts across the paint. And again, Jimmy doesn't receive it in the low post. He insists on receiving it out here on the perimeter. Every time they try to run head tap, Jimmy ends up in this standard formation of Jimmy on the side, shooters on the perimeter, sometimes a player in the dunker spot. Jimmy gets by his man. That forces help to come. That leaves Buddy Hield and Draymond being covered by one defender. Jimmy throwing it to Buddy Hield. Unfortunately, Sabonis has already committed to stopping Draymond's cut, so Buddy is very open. So if Jimmy Butler is just going to force the head tap play into this standard formation, Why not cut out the middleman? Jimmy Butler has a mismatch. There's no more rigmarole with a screen in the paint or the ball swinging around. They just chuck it to Jimmy in the place he's going to end up anyway. And now Jimmy's in his favorite spot on the side. These players now assume what I call Jimmy's standard formation. Trace is going to sit in this dunker spot. Guy, DeAnthony, and Podziemski spacing out on the arc where Jimmy can see them. Jimmy muscles his way into the smaller defender, and it's hard for any of these players to send help because they're stuck guarding shooters, and this big is stuck guarding Trace, who's a lob away from an alley-oop dunk, and that means Jimmy can just bully the mismatch, which is one reason why he's so good at getting free throws. So in the end, Jimmy convinced Steve Kerr to change his waterbending play into an earthbending play, taking out all the off-ball cuts and screens and turning it into a predictable, deterministic isolation play. When Steph is on the court, they run waterbending and Steph's chaotic airbending. But when it's just Jimmy without Steph, they run Jimmy standard earthbending. And this has worked great to stabilize the non-Steph minutes. Advanced analytics show that Jimmy Butler is still one of the very best players in the league last season and this season. However, in the playoffs, the Warriors ran into a problem with pure earthbending. Not only was Steph Curry out with a hamstring injury, but Jimmy Butler was still injured from the Houston Rockets series, and the Minnesota Timberwolves guarded Jimmy Butler in single coverage. And that's a problem for Jimmy's standard formation. When Jimmy drives, you want to force help.
Without Steph, we were trying to get him to attack that way to the beginning, and he just kept telling us, like, they're loading up. We need to create some other movement because they're just loading, And once everybody else started moving around him, then it opened gaps and he was able to do what he did.
So let's see what the play looks like when you add a little bit of waterbending back. The shot clock's getting low, so it's time for Jimmy Standard. Podziemski feeds Jimmy, and they quickly morph into Jimmy Standard. Podziemski running to the top of the key. Trace Jackson-Davis going to the dunker spot. These guys have to space themselves on the opposite side. Last time, Jimmy beat his man to the basket, but the big man rotated, and then when Trace tried to punish this defender, came over to disrupt the play. Well, look at this nice cut from the one and only Pat Spencer. Instead of staying spotted up on the perimeter, as soon as his defender turns his face, Pat with a beautiful curling cut through the paint. Here's another play. Jimmy in his favorite spot on the side. It's time for Jimmy Standard. Trace fighting for position at the dunker spot. Podziemski spacing out. Will Richard already spaced. And Pat Spencer could stay out at the arc, but he notices that all these defenders are not looking at him. He is no longer on the grid, and he sneaks behind everyone baseline. The Nets just react at the last second to catch Spencer, but Michael Porter Jr. gets caught ball watching. DeAnthony Melton sneaks behind him to the wing, and this is a very open three that gets generated. Here's another example. Jimmy screens to get the switch, so he's guarded by the smaller defender. Everyone knows it's Jimmy Standard time, so Will feeds Jimmy. Have I mentioned I have an irrational good feeling about him? 3 shooters on the arc, Trace lurking as a lob threat. Will Richard cuts through just to create something to distract the defense. The big defender had been marking Trace Jackson-Davis, but seeing Will Richard cutting through the paint, he's now distracted, and that means he is caught for a defensive 3-second violation. Let's run Jimmy Standard again. Jordi Fernandez, the coach of the Nets, yelling to Danny Wolf, saying, "Watch out for the post-up." Well, it's time for Jimmy Standard. And Jordy yells to CT, Cam Thomas, to double team Jimmy. They've had enough of Jimmy Standard. 2 defenders go to Jimmy, giving him the Shining Twins treatment. Jimmy, play with us forever and ever. Jimmy tries to dribble his way around the Saja boys. Pat Spencer can slip away to the corner unmarked. Talk about gravity. Jimmy's attracted the attention of CT, Danny, 3rd defender, 4th defenders cheating into the paint. 5 defenders are loading up on Jimmy's drive, throws it to the open Pat Spencer. Danny Wolf busts his butt to close out, and Pat Spencer calmly attacks the closeout, which means Jimmy's defender, Cam Thomas, has to step in to stop this drive, which means Pat can dish it right back to Jimmy, who takes what looks like a blow to a very sensitive male area, but manages to finish the layup anyway. Let's wrap up with our traditional celebration audit. Will Richard with a nice steal, which leads to a several-minute-long tie-up, which eventually leads to this thunderous dunk. Let's check out the bench. First, we have Al Horford pointing to Will Richard, very professional. Pat Spencer going two-sided bicep flex, very powerful. Buddy Hield appears to be making loud noises. Moses Moody's going for the classic raise the roof celebration. That steal and dunk was so spectacular that state regulations require a building change. Quentin Post is doing something very peculiar with his hands. He's got his thumb, index finger, and middle finger perpendicular, symmetrically on both sides, so either he's just stuck on automatic celebrating threes, or he may be flashing Fleming's left-hand rule and right-hand rule, showing us how to celebrate while keeping our electrical flow oriented. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you didn't enjoy this video, I promise I'll do better next time.